In a dim chamber of a forgotten monastery near Rhodes, where the air still tastes faintly of brine, a traveler kneels before a relic that should not exist. On the table before him lies a map, not drawn with ink, but with something stranger, darker. The faint scent of burnt salt rises from it, as though it remembers the sea that once drowned its maker. Beneath the wavering light of an oil lamp, the parchment breathes. Its surface cracked and uneven, edges curled like the hands of an ancient pilgrim who refused to let go. The map had been discovered by accident in the late 19th century, sealed inside a lead box beneath a stone floor. The monastery itself was built upon older ruins, and the monks who unearthed the artifact were not scholars but fishermen who prayed more than they spoke. Yet when the chest was opened, and the candlelight first touched that gray and silver surface, even the silence of prayer broke. For the lines it bore did not match any known geography. They charted coastlines where seas should be, islands where none had ever been seen, and mountain ranges that curved like the ribs of a sleeping creature. A single Latin inscription ran along the bottom margin, almost erased by time: Antediluvium. Some fragments of its design echo the Pyrie Reis map, that strange Ottoman relic from 1513 drawn on gazelle skin, where the Antarctic coast appears centuries before it was officially found. But this one feels older. Its compass rose is imperfect, its ink granulated like volcanic ash. When examined under glass, the particles glimmer faintly, a blend of carbon and crushed coral, the kind that forms only after long submersion in salt water. The map, in its own quiet way, is both document and confession. The traveler, perhaps an archaeologist, perhaps just a seeker of the lost, brushes his hand across its surface. The texture is uneven, like sand hardened by centuries of tide and sun. He follows a river that runs from nowhere to nowhere, through valleys now drowned beneath the Aegean. Some believe it represents the so-called Aegean basin before the melt of the last ice age, when islands like Crete, Santorini, and Cyprus were not yet islands but high plateaus of one vast continent. Others whisper of Plato's island beyond the pillars, and how maps such as these were once the sacred inheritance of sailors who remembered Atlantis not as myth, but as homeland. Every mark on the parchment feels deliberate, not drafted by hand, but etched by memory. There are faint annotations in a forgotten Greek dialect, Thalassothian, the sea of the gods. At the center of this sea, a small symbol, a spiral within a circle like the motion of a whirlpool. The same emblem appears on Minoan pottery and the stone gates of Göbekli Tepe, carved nearly 12,000 years ago. Coincidence, perhaps, but coincidence, in the language of lost civilizations, often feels like design. Outside, the wind moves through the olive groves. Inside, the flame leans toward the parchment as though reading. The traveler closes his eyes and imagines the world it portrays. A time when the air was thicker, the stars nearer, and the sea had not yet learned the word boundary. There are cities drawn upon that ancient coastline, small, neat clusters of squares and spirals. Some align exactly where modern sonar has revealed ruins beneath the Mediterranean. Pavlopetri off the coast of Laconia, Heracleion near Alexandria, the sunken stones off Yonaguni in distant Japan. Across cultures and oceans, echoes of the same drowned geometry. He imagines the hand that drew it, not of a scholar, but of a survivor. Someone who watched the waters rise, who carved memory into salt and ash before the tide reclaimed all sound. The symbols seem to breathe with grief. There are no names of kings, no markers of trade or conquest, only shorelines, winds, and the quiet routes between them. A map not of empire, but of endurance. At times, when the candle flickers, the traveler thinks the sea itself moves across the parchment. Tiny waves forming along the drawn coasts, erasing and reforming the land beneath. Perhaps the heat from his breath disturbs the surface, or perhaps something older stirs within. He leans closer, and the smell of the sea grows stronger, the salt air thick with a strange sweetness, as if a door has opened somewhere beneath the table. The monastery bell tolls far away, one long note that trembles through the stone walls. He looks up, and the flame bends sideways, stretching toward the dark. Outside, rain begins to fall, soft at first, then steady, like memory returning in fragments. The sound merges with the rhythmic dripping from the cracked ceiling. He closes his eyes again and sees the drowned cities, their towers of white limestone bending under green water, statues kneeling in slow motion, covered in coral and silence. Archaeologists speak of meltwater pulses, sudden rises in sea level at the end of the Pleistocene, when glaciers collapsed and the ocean swallowed coasts in a matter of centuries. One such event, they say, occurred around 10,000 BCE. To most, it is geology, but in the language of myth, it becomes something else. The flood, the deluge remembered in Genesis, in Sumer, in the tablets of Gilgamesh. The map seems to whisper that these are not separate stories but overlapping dreams. The same wave, seen through different tongues. But the disk is not the only mirror here. The diver writes in her log that the water itself behaves like one. Folds of brackish and salt layers that bend light into trembling. She thinks of the temples that once stood in this delta, gates aligned to the Nile's breath, and of how the flood is not always an ending, sometimes a form of preservation. The sea again as archivist. Elsewhere, far from the Nile, other mirrors keep their quiet. Off the coast of Laconia, at Pavlopetri, streets and courtyards lie beneath transparent water, their outlines neat as a plan drawn on glass. Computational models rebuild the town in soft gold, showing rooms around central courts, channels guiding flow, doorways widening toward the wind. When the sun stands high, the sea becomes a lens. The whole Bronze Age breathes between wave and stone. Near Haifa, Atlityam rests under a skin of light, its stone circle still upright around a vanished spring, human bones found in the sediments, a mother and child buried when the sea rose and did not apologize. In the Black Sea, on continental slopes that fall into anoxic dark, entire shipwrecks wait with their masts unrotted, rope intact, wood preserved by the absence of breath. There, the boundary layer acts like polished obsidian, not reflective to the eye alone, but to history. Oxygen above, silence below, a calm that keeps what turbulence would destroy. Some would take the word mirror and think of silver and faces. In older languages it also means counsel, memory, omen. A polished disc laid on an altar does not only show the priest. It returns the sky to the ritual chamber, brings moon and stars within reach of incense. The Minoans had basins in lustral rooms where water sat with deliberate stillness, catching torchlight like a captured constellation. Egyptian sanctuaries kept sacred lakes, perfect for teaching the sun to rise inside stone. Even later, Greek bronze hand mirrors doubled as amulets, backs engraved with Aphrodite or a winged victory, while the front simply held a brightness one could enter. To carry a mirror is to carry a portable dawn. Underwater, these objects learn new work. They hold no faces, only currents, and yet the gesture remains. The world looking at itself. The diver remembers a paper she read about Yonaguni, where steppe terraces off Japan's Ryukyu Islands appear through blue haze like a drowned amphitheater. Geologists argue for natural fracture. Others insist on cut angles, stair flights, right-angled corridors. Her training favors patience. She writes that the sea over Yonaguni acts like a lens, magnifying desire and doubt. Whether those planes were carved by masons or tied in time, the sensation in the water is the same. An audience made of stone staring upward, waiting for light to speak. At dusk on the North Sea, fishermen speak quietly of Doggerland, the country that once lay between Britain and the continent, now a memory beneath waves and trawl lines. Nets bring up antler picks, mammoth bones, fragments of hearths. On certain evenings, the sea is so still it turns black and glossy. One could imagine walking, if not for the cold. Archaeologists reconstruct the drowned rivers with sonar, those braided paths through reed beds that knew no English, no Dutch, only wind over marsh. A mirror of forgotten waters, there is not a single object. It is the surface itself, wide as a vanished nation, reflecting generations who never saw it coming. She returns to Heracleion another day when the river is less kind. Visibility closes to arm's length. The beam catches silt like snow. She follows the line to a cluster of toppled sculptures, lions with softened teeth, a torso with the weight of a god, a pharaoh's head whose eyes still watch. Frank Gaudio's maps are folded in a crate above, charts with precise grids. Down here the grid dissolves. The diver steadies her breath and feels the way the current plays along the stone. Low notes against the bronze like a tongue along a reed. She remembers reports from al-Samt of wells that still discharge fresh water on the seafloor, creating shimmering veils of difference, fresh water flowing inside salt like a spirit refusing a new name. At the edge of one such veil, a shallow basin cut into bedrock holds nothing but sand. Something about its shape pulls at her. A ritual bowl, perhaps, the kind where priests once watched the moon break into curvature and believed it spoke. Water, after all, is the oldest oracle. That night, rain drums on the metal roof of the barge. The team catalogues pottery, a bead carved from lapis with a drilled eye, a votive figure that has forgotten its hands. The conservator unwraps the bronze disc, newly lifted. Cleaned of its heavier crust, it carries a pale bruise of brightness, not enough to show a face, enough to suggest one. Along the rim, faint marks rise where corrosion has spared scratches. Not script the way papyrus holds it, but proofs of handling, the circles of fingers. She thinks of the people who touched it last on land. A priest at the house of Ammonius at Naucrates, a merchant wife measuring coals, a bride rehearsing the crown's weight. A mirror records nothing and remembers everything. It is the blank that keeps the shape of every gaze. What the diver does not write but feels is this. Sometimes a mirror exists to be broken. Not in glass-shattering violence, but in surrender, laid to rest where no eye demands it, allowed to reflect only water and the slow wanderings of light. The flood turns the instrument back into element, the artifact into environment. In that return, a gentler knowledge survives. There are other waters whose mirrors carry history in their skin. In high cenotes far from any sea, where limestone has opened into perfect circles, divers pass through haloclines that ripple like heat. The layer separates ages. Above, bright freshwater smelling of leaf and cave. Below, heavier salt, older, dreamlike. When a fin flicks the boundary, it blooms into cloud. In the Yucatan, the ancients lowered offerings there, jade and gold and bone, watching the objects vanish into the blur. In the Black Sea, the chemocline mirrors with darkness, a surface between life and the anoxic depths. Sonar finds ship after ship angled in sleep, masts upright, rigging intact, wood unchewed by time. When lights shine down from a submersible, the face of a vessel looks back as if moored yesterday. The boundary receives the image and gives nothing away. On a different shore, the wind leans over Santorini's caldera and hesitates. The sea in the crater is a sheet of ink when the volcano is quiet. Imagine, a lifetime ago, the city at Akrotiri, pigments fresh, mirrors of copper catching sunrise in rooms where windows faced the Aegean. When the mountain woke, walls fell under ash that preserved color beyond reason. Blues and cinnabars that still glow under careful lamps. Somewhere inside those rooms a basin must have held still water, and above it a woman tilted a mirror to fix a jewel in her hair. The gesture belonged to this world. The tools belonged to all of them: brush, bowl, burnished metal, small technologies that domesticated light. The traveler dips a quill into a small vial of ink, careful not to disturb the parchment. He writes down each symbol, tracing the unknown script along the margins. The letters seem to resist replication, as though they belong to no phonetic system, but to rhythm itself. Each one curves like tidewater or folds like sand at the foot of a wave. In the center of the parchment, between two forgotten rivers, lies a symbol shaped like a closed eye. Beneath it, in faint Latin, another word, memoria. From time to time, the diver dreams of the mirror they left in the silt. In the dream it lies face up, the river cloud parting now and then to lay the sky upon it. Cranes passing, a small sun, the paler disk of the moon in daytime. Fish flicker like thoughts and vanish. The mirror never moves. It holds what is given and lets it go. In waking life she tells herself that artifacts deserve rescue, context, a label, and a climate-controlled peace. In sleep, the river persuades her otherwise. There is a phrase she has copied from a field notebook kept by another team, in another sea. When the waters speak, listen for the dust. It returns to her as the barge anchors for the night and the delta falls almost silent. Spray taps the hull in a pattern that could be script if the ear were patient. The mirror on the table reflects only a smudge of lamplight. The metal is tired of faces. She lifts it slightly, and a warmer gleam runs along the rim, then fades. Perhaps that is enough evidence of brightness, not possession. Morning thins the mist. The barge turns on its chain with the changing tide, and for a breath, the water ahead becomes perfect, a page unmarked. In that stillness, the city below appears as a delicate negative. Columns in suggestion, a doorway's shadow, the thought of a street. Then ripples return and the page closes. Not an ending, a blink, a reminder that some knowledge survives best in reflection, where the world reads itself without needing to explain. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps these are mirrors the flood kept for the work of remembering. Not our names and faces, but the old arrangements of light across stone and water, the way a city learns to recognize the sky. And when we lean over them, when our lamps fall into their quiet, they answer with what all true mirrors give. Not certainty, but the softest outline of what we were about to see, just before sleep. South of Cyrenaica, where the Libyan coast leans toward Crete and the sea glows like melted glass, research vessels have mapped a plain that was once dry ground. Between its sandstone ridges lie rows of regular mounds. Not coral, not dune, but something arranged. When sub-bottom sonar passes over them, the pattern emerges. Parallel furrows, 10 meters apart, curving as if following the shape of wind long forgotten. Marine botanists call the region Apollonia Paleolandscape Sector C. Divers call it the Garden. The first human who may have touched it again after 10 millennia was Dr. Layla Ben Harith, a marine archaeobotanist from Alexandria. Her camera shows nothing dramatic, just silt and seagrass wavering under a blue-green roof of light until she moves closer. Then appear the roots, tangles of fossilized reeds, stalks mineralized into stone, clusters of ancient grain pollen trapped in sediment. Radiocarbon dates place them around 8,500 BCE, roughly the same age as Tel Abu Hurera on the Euphrates and the first domesticated wheat. A Neolithic field lies here, drowned but perfectly preserved. She calls it a garden because that word carries breath and tenderness. The old root in Akkadian, Gan Edenu, means enclosure of delight. Every civilization that followed carried some echo of that image. Babylon's terraces, Persia's paradise plots cut by running water, Egypt's temple orchards where acacia and pomegranate shadowed the courts of Ammonius. The seafloor rows of Apollonia are older than all of them, a plan drawn before writing, erased by tide yet visible when the light comes from the right angle. In core samples, the sediment still holds seeds of barley, wild emmer, and a species of flax unknown today. Under the microscope, each seed is intact, its surface glazed with salt crystals like tiny stars. The lab calls them subfossil specimens. Layla writes in her field notes that they look awake. Perhaps that is why legends of a sleeping garden beneath the sea persist along the Maghreb shore. Fishermen there say the weeds glow on certain nights and that fish avoid them, as if the roots still breathe. Satellite imagery confirms the plain was once a delta connected to the ancient Barca River. When ice melt lifted the Mediterranean around 6000 BCE, the valley filled, salt water invading fresh. The rise was slow enough for villages to watch their fields turn to marsh and then to mirror. Artifacts washed ashore, a flint hoe, a bead of malachite, mark their patience. They did not leave all at once. They moved upslope as each generation lost a row of barley. By the time the sea reached their doorsteps, they had already begun telling the story that would become our oldest dream. A garden fallen into water yet never dead. On the seabed today lie stone channels carved to guide fresh springs. Divers follow them toward a terrace where columns of sandstone stand in pairs. At the center rests a bowl carved from basalt, wide as a table. Its rim is not decorative but functional, a drain to collect runoff, an irrigation feature repeated thousands of years later in Egypt's Nilotic gardens. Time echoes itself in stone and seed. He whispers the translation to himself, memory, or in a deeper sense, remembrance, a world that refused to vanish entirely, preserved in grain and salt. For centuries, maps have served as proof of knowledge. But this one feels like the opposite, not a declaration of mastery, but a confession of loss. A cartography of mourning. A marine biologist working with Layla records that the current through the channels produces tones like flute notes. When played back through amplified hydrophones, the pattern resembles breathing, long intake, slow release, as if the plane still exhales. The scientists label it hydrodynamic resonance. Layla keeps the recording and writes in her journal. The earth remembers its own lungs. Legends along the Libyan coast tie this valley to the story of Isis searching for Osiris. They say she rested here, planting reed and grain to mark where her tears fell. When the sea rose, the plants sank but never died. They became the first seagrass, the green veil that feeds all life underwater. The myth and the core samples agree on one thing: transformation is never the same as loss. Archaeologists recover from the upper slopes figurines of fired clay, each with arms curved like shoots and bodies painted with waving lines. Their faces are featureless, but the surface bears faint streaks of green pigment, malachite ground with fat to imitate leaves. They are the earliest known representations of plants as divine forms. Millennia later, Greek potters will paint the same gesture as Persephone rising from the soil, and Hebrew scribes will speak of a garden eastward in Eden. Memory travels by route. When storms cross this part of the Mediterranean, currents pull across the plain and the sea turns pale turquoise, as if the sand below were breathing light. Remote sensors show carbon bubbles rising from peat under the mud, decay of old vegetation that still feeds the water. Layla calls it the garden's last harvest. At night, bioluminescent plankton ride those bubbles to the surface, lighting the waves in threads of green. Seen from the deck of her research ship, it looks as if the plain below has woken for a moment to breathe. There are records of other gardens lost to water, in Doggerland's peat where hazelnuts and oak leaves still surface whole, in the Persian Gulf Paleodelta where satellite imagery traces rivers older than you are. Each offers the same lesson in silence. The things that feed us most are the first to vanish and the last to be forgotten. On Layla's final expedition season, she descends once more to the plain. Visibility is clear to 40 meters. Sun filters through the sea like dust through cathedral glass. At the edge of a terrace, she finds a line of stones that curve into a half circle. Inside them, a patch of seagrass grows denser, brighter. Her instruments show higher oxygen content in the water there. It is as if the garden still works. She records coordinates and lingers until her air runs low. When she turns to go, a ray passes over the field, stirring sand like wind through grain. For an instant, the rows appear whole again, and the plain looks alive. Later, writing by lamp in her cabin, she notes that agriculture was never merely technology, it was memory made visible. To plant a seed is to believe in return. She thinks perhaps the first gardeners built this field as a promise to the future, that even if the world sinks, life will find light again. In the morning, the ship drifts above still water. Below, nothing is visible but color, a muted green, a hint of gold. The garden rests, unmoving. The sea keeps its dream. Somewhere beneath those layers, seeds sleep in perfect darkness, their skins intact, their genes remembering rain. One day the sediment will shift, the water will warm, and perhaps one will split, sending a ghost of a root into salt. It will not grow, but it will try, and that gesture will be enough. The garden is not a place. It is a continuing breath between earth and water, and if you listen closely through the hull of the boat, you may hear it. The sound of small waves lapping over rows of stone, a soft rustle that might be current or memory. Both mean the same thing. Both mean life. At the edge of the Mediterranean, where the cliffs of Gozo lean into the sea and wind walks unbroken from Africa, stands a ruin the locals call Al-Kaz, the arch. It is not a true arch, but the corner of a massive circular tower whose stones still hold warmth after sundown. No one knows who built it. Farmers say it is Phoenician, tourists say Roman, but archaeologists know it is older even than Stonehenge. Carbon traces from hearth ash beneath its foundation point to around 3600 BCE, the same age as Gantija, the oldest freestanding temple in Europe. The flame shivers once more. For a moment, he sees his own reflection in the map. His face fractured by the folds, his eyes divided by continents that no longer exist. The shadow of his own hand drifts across what was once a mountain range, and he realizes that to look upon this thing is to become part of it. Every viewer adds another layer of time, another echo of belief. Perhaps that is how the map remains alive, by remembering those who dare to read it. In that age, the air was thick with dust from the desert beyond the sea. Across the Mediterranean, others were building too, Naphtali's stone circles in Egypt's western desert, aligned to the rising of Sirius, the great corridor tomb of Newgrange in Ireland, designed to catch the first light of the winter solstice, the megaliths of Najdra and Hagar Kim in Malta, whose central axes point precisely toward sunrise on the equinox. People separated by thousands of miles were shaping stone into instruments of time. It was not worship of the sun, but conversation with it. The tower at Gozo belongs to that same lineage, a monument not to power but to patience. It stands atop a ridge facing east, its stairway carved directly into the bedrock. Each step is uneven, worn by millennia of wind, yet still climbs toward a chamber open to the horizon. The walls bear no ornament except shallow spirals, so faint they seem like breaths left on skin. At the summit, archaeologists found an altar block polished smooth by centuries of touch. On its surface, a shallow groove channels rainwater into a cistern below, a symbol, perhaps, of light descending into darkness. The site was first surveyed in the 1920s by a Maltese scholar, Maria Aquilina, who noted that the tower's main aperture faces precisely the point where the sun rises on the equinox. She described it as a stairway for the day. At dawn on March 21st, the first beam of light passes through the opening and strikes the inner wall, illuminating a carved circle no larger than a human hand. For 4 minutes each year, the tower awakens. Then it sleeps again. Aquilina's notes mention something else, the faint scent of salt in the air, even when the sea is calm and distant. She believed the tower had once stood closer to the shore, before uplift and erosion drew the land away. Marine geologists confirm her intuition. Fossil shells embedded in nearby rock prove that the ridge was once a coastal promontory. The tower was a lighthouse before lighthouses, a place where dawn first touched the sea. The structure is unique among Neolithic monuments because of its height. Most temples of the period spread horizontally, sanctuaries of enclosure. This one reached upward. Its builders lifted stones weighing more than 15 tons, each balanced upon the next without mortar. Each fitted so precisely that the gaps between them measure less than the width of a reed. To raise such mass required coordination beyond survival, a society that listened to the rhythm of the seasons and to the silence between them. The tower is not a fortress, not a tomb. It is an act of waiting carved into earth. During recent excavations, archaeologists discovered fragments of ochre-painted pottery depicting ladders and spirals. Some scholars interpret them as metaphors of ascent, a visual language describing movement between worlds. In the mythology of nearby Malta, there are tales of a house of the rising wind, where priests would keep vigil through the night, waiting for the first light to spill through the eastern gate. When it came, they would strike stone chimes to announce dawn's return. Small limestone slabs found near the tower, each drilled to emit a tone when struck, support the story. The tower's acoustics remain extraordinary. Even today, a whisper at its base climbs the walls like smoke, reaching the upper chamber almost intact. The structure seems to amplify low frequencies, creating a resonance that lingers seconds after the sound ends. During solstice studies, researchers noticed that when the first beam of light enters the chamber, the temperature drops momentarily, and the air vibrates faintly. Instruments record a frequency around 110 Hz, identical to the earth tone used in Tibetan temples millennia later. Whether coincidence or convergence, it suggests the ancients knew how to tune stone to breath. The tower's builders left offerings within cracks between blocks, seashells, charred barley, beads of green serpentine. One item found deeper in a fissure, unreachable without dismantling part of the wall, was a small sphere of translucent gypsum. It fits perfectly in the palm, and when held to the sun, It refracts light into a narrow column. The archaeologists call it the dawn stone. Some think it was placed there to focus the first ray of sunrise into the heart of the tower. If so, it means they captured dawn not as spectacle, but as ritual precision, the universe reduced to a line of gold passing through air and dust. Far across the world, in the high Andes of Peru, another tower stands that answers the same question in another tongue. The Taurian at Machu Picchu. Built by the Inca, it aligns with the solstice sunrise so precisely that light enters through a trapezoidal window and rests on a ceremonial stone for less than 3 minutes each year. The pattern repeats in Bolivia's Calisasaya, in Egypt's Karnak, in Cambodia's Angkor Wat. Across continents and centuries, humans built towers to hold dawn for a moment, to confirm that light will return. Perhaps the purpose was reassurance. After flood, after darkness, after the long winters when the sun retreated, the tower stood as promise. Stone does not doubt, simply waits. Outside, thunder murmurs across the sea, low and distant. The traveler gathers his notes, but cannot bring himself to roll the map back up. The parchment seems to resist closure, edges trembling faintly, as if unwilling to sleep again. He wonders how many before him have opened it. How many nights it has waited in darkness for eyes willing to believe that the world once wore a different face. There is no date, no signature, only a faint watermark, visible when the light catches just right. A symbol resembling the constellation Lyra, the harp of Orpheus. The same constellation said to mark the celestial pole 10,000 years ago, before the heavens shifted. In 2018, a team led by Maltese and German researchers conducted ground-penetrating radar studies around the base. They discovered an underground chamber linked by a narrow shaft, a hollow carved directly beneath the altar. Inside, they found nothing. No bones, no artifacts, only still air and the faint smell of limestone. Yet the shaft's alignment perfectly mirrors the stair above. It is as if the builders made a twin path, one climbing into light, the other descending into shadow. A dialogue between ascent and descent, dawn and dusk, life and memory. On certain mornings, when mist covers the ridge, the tower seems to float, its upper rim glowing like a crown above cloud. Pilots flying between Sicily and Tunis have reported the sight at sunrise. A solitary ring of stone emerging through vapor, like an island of silence. Local fishermen who pass beneath the cliffs at dawn say they hear a sound then. Not the wind, but a deep note rising from the stone. They call it Ayel Nifs Taljum, the breath of the day. Maria Aquilina wrote before her death that she once climbed the tower alone before dawn. The sky was heavy with cloud, and she feared there would be no sunrise. But as she stood at the altar, a narrow gap opened in the horizon, and light poured through, so sharp it carved her shadow onto the inner wall. She wrote, "For a moment, I saw my outline stand beside the carvings of the old priests. I think they built it for that, to remember we were here, between night and the return of fire. If you stand there now, among the stones warm with centuries, the same light still arrives. It is thin, almost shy, touching the spirals on the wall one by one before fading. Birds rise from the cliffs, the air fills with the smell of salt, and for an instant, the sea below mirrors the sky above, both burning with the same gold. Then the light moves on, and the tower returns to shadow. Each dawn repeats this gesture, patient, precise. The tower does not age. It only waits. It waited through flood and empire, through silence and rediscovery, holding the same breath since the first builder set the first stone. Perhaps that is why we still build, not to conquer time, but to meet it halfway, to greet the day as it returns from its long journey through the dark. The tower is not calling for prayer or witness. It is listening, keeps vigil for the world itself. When the sun rises tomorrow, its light will find the same circle on the inner wall, and the tower will glow from within, the stone remembering dawn as if it were the first. And if someone happens to stand there, a traveler, a scholar, a shepherd, they will see their own shadow blend with those that came before. In that moment, every age will meet in a single breath of light, and the tower, patient as ever, will keep waiting for the next one. They say that in the beginning there was only fire and silence, the glow of a young world learning how to cool. But long after the magma hardened and oceans found their rhythm, there were people who remembered that light, not as myth but as ancestry. In caves across Europe and the Levant, deep under stone where no sun had ever entered, archaeologists find their traces still. Ochre hands pressed upon walls, pigments of iron and ash tracing the outlines of animals that no longer roam. To modern eyes, they are art. To those who made them, they were echoes of light, an attempt to call the sun into darkness. These were the children of the first light, though the name comes much later, from a fragment of an Akkadian tablet describing those whose eyes still carried the dawn. Geneticists today call them by other names: the Aurignacians, the Natufians, the first agriculturalists of Anatolia. Yet across their migrations runs a single pattern, a fascination with illumination. The oldest pigments ever mixed by human hands, red ochre and powdered shell, appear not on weapons or tools, but on bodies, on burial shrouds, on stone figurines carved with eyes of quartz. Perhaps it was meant to align the world below with the one above. Perhaps it was drawn in memory of the night the stars changed places, when the sea reached the threshold of the temples, and silence began its long reign. At Kafza in Israel, a child's bones rest with lumps of ochre beside the skull, a deliberate anointing 40,000 years before the first known civilization. At Sungur in Russia, the dead were dusted with thousands of ivory beads that catch light even now under a lamp. In each gesture lies the same belief, that the soul shines. Archaeology does not speak of souls, but it cannot ignore how the ancients treated light. In Göbekli Tepe, the oldest known temple, pillars are carved with foxes and cranes, creatures of dawn. In the caves of Lascaux, the artists placed torches in niches so that flickering flame made the animals move. The world itself became theater of light and shadow. Later, in Egypt's first dynasties, sunlight was measured in cubits of gold. Priests timed prayers to the first ray striking the temple floor. Always the same message, translated through eras, that illumination is not external but returning. The name Children of the First Light first appeared in modern print in 1929, when British archaeologist Hilda Wainwright excavated a burial site in Cappadocia. Inside a collapsed limestone chamber, she found 3 skeletons arranged in a triangle, each with a sphere of translucent alabaster placed where the heart once beat. When light struck them, the stones glowed softly from within. Wainwright wrote, "It was as though each chest held a captured sunrise." The discovery baffled her peers. Alabaster that pure could only have been quarried hundreds of kilometers away. The people who placed it there had carried dawn through mountains. Later analysis dated the burial to 9,500 BCE, roughly the same horizon as the Temple of Breath and early Jericho. The skulls showed delicate traces of cinnabar, mercury or ground into pigment, around the eyes and mouth. Mercury, toxic and luminous, was sacred to early alchemists for its ability to reflect. It appears again in China's early tombs, in Mesoamerica's ritual basins, always tied to light's imitation. It is as if the dead were being returned to the element they once carried inside. The first light, in every culture, has 2 meanings: the literal sun that rises after darkness, and the metaphorical awareness that awakens within. Anthropologists studying Paleolithic art often remark on the suddenness of its arrival. One geological blink, and humanity begins to paint, to carve, to imagine. Before that, tools were functional, lives practical. Then, as if some hidden ember had been stirred, symbols appeared. Circles, spirals, rays. It was not evolution in the biological sense. It was recognition, light remembering itself through flesh. The children of the first light were not a single people, but a thread of memory running through many. In Mesopotamia they became the keepers of flame, those who tended eternal fires in ziggurats. In Egypt they became the Shemsuhor, followers of Horus, mythic beings who ruled before kings, described as shining ones who came from the west. In Mesoamerica, they appear as the first architects of Teotihuacan, builders of the avenue of the dead aligned to the rising Pleiades. Their myths say they brought fire from stars that had fallen into the sea. Always the same geometry of faith, light descending, humanity ascending. In 2007, genetic sequencing from ancient remains at Göbekli Tepe revealed an unexpected link. Mitochondrial haplogroups connecting those early Anatolians to populations that would later appear along the Nile and the Indus Valley. The same genetic markers accompany obsidian trade routes stretching from Cappadocia to Jericho. Wherever those genes travel, so do polished mirrors of volcanic glass, handheld fragments of night made reflective. The children of the first light seem to have carried both tools and symbols of illumination. Archaeologists studying burial goods across these regions note the repetition of one particular object, a small disc or bead pierced through its center. When strung on fiber and spun, it flashes alternately light and dark. Some call it a child's toy. Others suspect something older. A meditation on the alternation itself, the rhythm of day and night captured between fingers. Even the earliest myths of resurrection, Osiris reborn, Persephone rising, the Hopi twin gods carrying the sun, trace back to that pulse, the promise that the light returns because it never truly left. One of the most haunting discoveries connected to this lineage came from Lake Mungo in Australia. There, scientists unearthed remains over 40,000 years old, the oldest known cremation. The bones were painted in ochre. That same pigment appears in burials on the opposite side of the planet, from Spain's El Castillo cave to South Africa's Blombos shelter. It is as if color itself carried a code, a message spanning continents. To mark the body red was to prepare it for sunrise. In the archives of the Louvre lies a small cylinder seal from Susa, carved in the 3rd millennium BCE. It shows a figure standing between two mountains, rays streaming from its shoulders. Around it kneel smaller humans holding torches. The inscription reads, Dumuyu, Children of the Sun. Wainwright would have recognized it. Thousands of years after her Cappadocian burials, the name still endured, translated from whisper to clay. The traveler finally exhales gently, and the candle bends toward the parchment one last time. The edges curl inward, softly, like a closing petal. The light fades across its surface until only the central spiral remains visible, glowing faintly, then vanishing into shadow. Modern cosmologists speak of the last universal ancestor, the single cell from which all life descended. The ancients would have understood it differently, not as biology but as light. For them, origin was luminosity, the spark that entered darkness and multiplied until it found shape in us. The children of the first light, whether as myth or migration, are our memory of that awakening. On a winter morning in the Anatolian plateau, where the stone pillars of Göbekli Tepe now stand behind fences and scaffolds, the first sunlight still falls as it did 12,000 years ago. The air smells of frost and dust. A shepherd passes, his breath turning briefly to gold. Somewhere beneath those stones lie fragments of quartz polished by human hands, the same kind that once lined burial chambers, the same that scatter light even in absence. The archaeologists collect them carefully, but there are too many. The entire hill seems filled with glittering dust, as if the ground itself remembers being bright. At night, when stars rise over the plateau, the sight glows faintly, not from lamps, but from frost-reflecting starlight. The wind moves through the pillars like through organ pipes, humming low. The same vibration that once filled the temple of breath, the same tone that follows every dawn. In that sound, imagination and science meet, the frequency of the world remembering its origin. Perhaps that is what we inherit from those ancient wanderers. Not their tools, nor their temples, but their patience with light. They did not seek to own it, only to dwell within its rhythm. They built no empires. They built alignments. They left no kings. They left shadows that teach the sun where to rise. If you were to stand among their ruins now, the horizon would still burn softly. The stones would still wait for illumination. And if you lifted a shard of quartz toward the sky, it would catch the same ancient radiance that first learned to see itself through human eyes. Maybe that is what it means to be their descendant, to remember the dawn inside the dark, to carry light not as inheritance but as pulse. Somewhere in our marrow, the first light still stirs, quiet and patient, waiting for each generation to notice. And when it does, for one breath, the whole world opens, bright, weightless, and utterly familiar, as though the morning has never truly ended. Far beyond the continental shelf, where daylight fails and the sea turns from blue to endless ink, a survey vessel drifts above a trench unnamed on most maps. Its crew of oceanographers call it simply the Rift. 2.5 kilometers below them, sonar has drawn the outline of something that does not belong there. An upright shape, symmetrical, 30 meters high, carved from basalt. The signal returns a curve where the currents should give only chaos, and a shadow that repeats itself like breath. When they send the submersible down, the last color to vanish is green. Then only instrument light remains, red and white pulses falling through dark water like prayers dropped into a bottomless sky. The statue appears slowly, as if surfacing in reverse. A head first, massive, eyeless, crowned by erosion that looks almost deliberate. Then shoulders, a torso, arms that do not fold or reach but open, palms upward, waiting. Around its base rise smaller stones that once might have been figures or offerings, now softened to nameless shapes. The team records measurements, but the cameras can barely hold the image. Light scatters and dissolves. The ocean does not like to be filmed. Outside, the rain has stopped. The wind carries the smell of wet earth and distant salt. In the stillness that follows, he cannot tell whether he has found the map or the map has found him. They name it the Watcher. Geologists will later suggest volcanic extrusion, the way molten basalt can harden into columns. Yet the proportions defy randomness. The alignment of its arms matches no natural fracture. The sonar grid shows a platform of hewn rock beneath it, as if set by hand. The trench lies east of Cyprus, a region where the seafloor holds relics of collapsed crust from the late Pleistocene. Land once dry, then lost to the flood that joined the Mediterranean to the world ocean. Somewhere down there may be the graves of cities whose names eroded from all languages. The submersible's operator describes the sound before he sees the shape. A resonance that hums through the metal hull, steady, almost musical. Instruments record it as infrasound, too low for the ear but strong enough to rattle the heart. The sea has its own voice, older than whales or wind. The closer they drift to the statue, the more distinct it becomes. A single tone, unbroken, the same note each time. Some call it coincidence, a pressure oscillation of the trench. Others, less hurried to explain, call it prayer. At the surface, storms move across the horizon like migrating mountains. On the monitor, the Watcher's face fills the frame. Smooth where eyes should be, a mouth slightly parted. The pilot remarks that it looks as if it's listening. No one replies. In the sub's brief lights, plankton shimmer like dust motes in a cathedral, then vanish again into black. Archaeologists consulted later recognize hints of known forms. The elongated skulls of Ain Ghazal statues, the basalt heads of Nemrut Dag, the colossal Olmec visages half a world away. Yet none fit exactly. The basalt itself predates any tool marks known from human hands. The trench rock solidified millions of years before civilization. If shaped, it was shaped from the inside, stone transformed by intention older than time as we count it. Theories multiply. A forgotten culture from the post-glacial lowlands. A natural extrusion modified by chance. A trick of sonar. But those who have heard the recordings know that something lingers in the tone. When amplified, it wavers like a human breath trying to remember speech. In 1974, an undersea cable passing near the site picked up unexplained low-frequency oscillations. The Navy cataloged them as geophysical. When researchers later compared the signal with the Watcher's hum, the patterns matched exactly, separated by decades. The trench had been singing long before anyone found its face. There are myths that seem to anticipate it. In the tablets of Ugarit, a god named Shapshu, the sun, descends each night into the sea to judge the dead, guided by a mute sentinel of stone. In the Book of the Dead, a gatekeeper called the Listener beneath the waters guards the passage of souls. Farther east, Sumerian texts speak of Enki's servant statues that record the words of men and deliver them to the abyss. Each legend imagines silence not as absence but as witness. The oceanographers who revisited the site years later brought instruments for mapping magnetic anomalies. They found that the watcher sits precisely at the meeting of two fault lines, where the Earth's magnetic field twists into loops. The basalt there carries remnant magnetism strong enough to deflect compass needles. When currents shift, the polarity wavers, producing vibrations within the audible range. The hum, they concluded, is the voice of the planet itself, focused by geometry. The statue, if statue it is, merely stands at the ear of the world. Still, when divers listen, something in them answers. One wrote in her log, "You feel it in the bones before the ears, like the sea has remembered your heartbeat." Another refused to go back down, saying that in the dark she felt as though she were being measured, not by eyes but by patience. Some say the world ended once, quietly, beneath waves that sang no warning. Others believe it never ended at all. It simply folded, like parchment, upon itself. And somewhere, in that fold, the lost coasts still wait, drawn in ash and salt, dreaming of the day the tide will remember their names once more. In the museum at Nicosia, a fragment recovered from the site rests in a glass case. It is unremarkable, a palm-sized shard of basalt, its surface smoother than erosion allows. Under scanning electron microscopy, traces of fused silica suggest it was once exposed to extreme heat, hotter than any known forge. The curator keeps the lights dim. The stone seems to absorb them. Visitors stand before it quietly, as if noise might wake it. Somewhere beneath the trench, hydrothermal vents exhale their mineral breath. Around them grow forests of tube worms, blind shrimp, pale crabs, life built entirely on darkness, thriving on the warmth of the earth rather than the sun. Perhaps the watcher stands for them too, a monument to a world that never needed light. Its open hands, coated in mineral bloom, shelter anemones that sway like slow-burning candles. To them, the hum is home. When the submersible rises, the sound fades. Above, wind and wave erase all continuity. Yet on certain nights, the vessel's steel still vibrates faintly. The crew wake to feel it in their ribs, a rhythm steady as breathing. The deep records everything. Every drop of rain that falls upon the ocean surface eventually reaches its floor as sediment. Every shipwreck becomes reef. Every vibration echoes down until the mud swallows it. The watcher has heard them all. If it keeps silence, it is because it has learned the futility of reply. Sailors who pass over the coordinates now toss coins into the water, a habit with no known origin. They say it calms the waves. The sea accepts every offering without sound. If you could descend alone, switch off the lamps, drift close enough to touch, you might find that the basalt is warm, faintly pulsing with the planet's interior fire. You might feel a tremor move through your suit, not threatening, simply steady, like a heart too vast to belong to one being. And in that pulse, for an instant, you might understand the purpose of its waiting. Perhaps it is not guarding, nor remembering, nor judging. Perhaps it simply listens, to the roar of tides above, to the slow drift of continents, to the murmurs of everything that has ever fallen into water. The silence is not absence but comprehension. And when one day the surface world quiets, the city's gone, the noise ended, the light dimmed, the watcher will still stand there in the dark, its open hands gathering silt and coral, its hum rising through the last currents. The ocean will close over it, and the earth will continue to breathe through stone. Some voices do not fade. They become the silence that holds all others. The watcher is that silence, anchored in the deep, waiting for nothing, missing nothing, listening still. Somewhere between the known and the vanishing, where the desert meets the edge of an inland salt sea, there stands a field of stones that hum when the wind passes through them. Not loudly, not constantly, just long enough for the air to remember it has a voice. Local nomads call the place Safa al-Samt, the plain of silence. Archaeologists who charted its coordinates in the 1980s noted the same phenomenon. Each pillar drilled with narrow channels, angled to catch prevailing winds, together producing a harmony too deep for the ear yet strong enough to rattle the ribs. They dated the stonework to about 2400 BCE, late enough for the copper chisel but too early for the mathematics implied by the alignment. Beneath a slope of green hills near the Turkish coast, Where the Black Sea meets the ruins of what was once Heracleion Pontica, there runs a narrow passage carved through limestone. Locals call it Yıldız Kuyusu, the Well of Stars, though no one has seen starlight reach its floor in centuries. It was there, beneath dripping stone and fern roots, that the first tablets were found, sealed in clay, wrapped in woven reeds hardened by time. The archaeologists who unearthed them in 1934 believed they had stumbled upon a lost Sumerian archive displaced by flood or exile. Yet the inscriptions were not purely Sumerian. The script flowed like a merging of tongues, part Akkadian, part Linear A, with faint traces of Phoenician rhythm. It was as if language itself had pooled here, in the dark, and congealed into memory. When researchers mapped the pillars, they found that the pattern stretched for nearly 2 kilometers, arcs and counterarcs echoing the path of sound waves, like a frozen diagram of vibration. The pillars point toward the horizon where, once a year, the sun dies behind a ridge of salt dunes. For a few minutes, the entire plain glows white, then falls into a quiet so complete that even wind seems to kneel. Then comes the hum. No one knows who built it, though the local Bedouin tell a story that the site was raised by people who could hear the stars. Old myths from the Levant speak of similar listeners, servants of the god Dagon who stood on high places and sang to measure the distance between earth and heaven. In Mesopotamia, clay tablets from Nippur describe sound gates made of bronze through which divine breath passed each dawn. The plane of silence seems an echo of that impulse, to turn geometry into music, to teach stone to carry tone. Modern acousticians who modeled the site discovered that its resonance frequencies match those of the human chest cavity and heart. When the wind moves across the field, the sound enters the body rather than the ear, a subsonic pulse that makes ribs vibrate as though joining a larger respiration. One of the engineers called it the lungs of the horizon. Another, less literal, wrote that it felt like standing inside a prayer. Far away, in a different desert, there are similar voices. The standing stones of Kallanish in the Hebrides, the Great Basin boulders of Nevada, even the basalt columns of Namibia, all sing under certain winds, notes formed by erosion yet hauntingly regular. The world seems to tune itself, finding one long chord that spans oceans. The ancients must have known. They left their altars where the resonance was strongest. In 2021, a team analyzing infrared satellite images of the Safa site discovered something unexpected. Faint lines radiating outward beyond the known pillars, invisible on the surface but etched into subsurface sediments. When plotted, they formed a spiral thousands of meters wide, the same logarithmic curve found in shells, galaxies, hurricanes, and the cochlea of the human ear. The plane of silence, it seemed, was not only meant to sound, it was meant to listen. When wind crosses that geometry, sensors record microfluctuations far below audible range, pulses identical to the oscillations detected in Earth's magnetic field. The implication is unnerving. The structure may convert the planet's own electromagnetic breath into vibration, a prehistoric antenna, tuned not to heaven, but to the deep hum of the earth itself. The ancients left offerings among the stones, fragments of shell, carnelian beads, bird bones, and pieces of fired clay flutes too fragile to play. On one, a single inscription, a spiral with 4 short strokes, the symbol for breath in Proto-Canaanite script. Nothing else remains. The desert kept their secret by turning it into weather. At night, when the temperature drops, the stones click softly as they release the day's heat. The rhythm is random but strangely soothing, like the sound of rain on an unseen roof. Field workers who camp nearby report dreams of water, of waves moving in slow motion through sand. They wake to find frost on their blankets and the faint hum beginning again with the first hint of dawn wind. Lay observers might call it coincidence, the interaction of topography and air. Yet the effect on the mind is undeniable. Even after leaving, many say they still hear it. A tone that surfaces at the edge of sleep, too low to follow but impossible to forget. It has been recorded, analyzed, filtered. Still it resists definition. The frequency shifts with time of day, always returning to a single average, 432 Hz, a pitch ancient theorists associated with the music of spheres. To modern science, it is merely a number. To ancient builders, perhaps it was the measure of calm. There is another place, across the world's spine, where a similar hum haunts stone. In the highlands of Bolivia, among the terraces of Tiwanaku, a wall of red sandstone blocks bears shallow cuts that produce tones when struck. Locals call it La Muralla que Canta, the wall that sings. Its pitch, when analyzed, aligns almost perfectly with that of the Safa field. Two civilizations separated by oceans, sculpting stone into the same silent chord. Coincidence or memory shared through the bones of the planet. When the rain falls over that place, it does not sound like water but like the slow turning of pages. The passage fills with that hollow, rhythmic murmur, an underground whisper that seems to breathe through the cracks. One can imagine that sound rising through the centuries, unchanged, brushing against the ears of shepherds, monks, explorers, and finally the modern hands that open the soil again. Above, the fields gleam silver in the stormlight. Below, in the heart of stone, a library sleeps. Physicists speak now of microseismic noise, the constant vibration of the earth caused by ocean waves and atmospheric pressure. The amplitude is small but omnipresent, a heartbeat of the world at frequencies between 0.1 and 0.3 hertz, far below human hearing, yet measurable everywhere. The ancients may not have had instruments, but they had patience. They could feel what our devices only graph. Perhaps the music of the last horizon was simply the Earth's own hum, made audible by human devotion. In 1999, a sandstorm uncovered a section of the Safa plain that had been buried for millennia. Beneath two collapsed pillars lay a cavity lined with plaster. Inside, archaeologists found a set of ceramic vessels arranged in a circle, each containing crystals of desert salt fused into solid blocks. When handled, they emit a faint crackle, piezoelectric discharge. The same principle modern microphones use to turn vibration into sound. It seems the builders had, without knowing, captured a technology of listening. Salt, wind, and stone composing the earliest recording studio of the world. When the last expedition left, they sealed the site again under sandcloth and gravel to protect it from tourists and storms. Only the wind remains constant. Each season, it redraws the dunes, erases footprints, retunes the field. The hum persists. At sunset, the horizon of the salt sea turns mirror bright. Air stills. The line between water and sky dissolves. Those who stand among the pillars say they can hear two tones at once. One rising, one falling, intertwining like breathing. It lasts until the sun's disk disappears, then stops abruptly, leaving a vacuum of silence so deep it feels like descent. A pilgrim once wrote in his notebook, "When the sound ends, the heart keeps its echo." Some believe the builders meant the site as farewell, the last song of a culture watching the sea advance toward their fields. They could not stop the flood, but they could leave behind the resonance of their world. Each pillar, each channel, each alignment was a syllable in that final composition. The horizon became their instrument, the wind, their bow. When the last of them departed, the melody remained, etched into geometry. It is still playing. We are only now close enough, quiet enough to hear it again. In the recordings captured there, filtered and sped up, the tone reveals overtones, intervals that correspond to the harmonic series found in all musical scales. Some listeners describe it as a choir, others as an organ made of sky. To hear it properly, one must slow the breath to match it. 4 beats in, 4 beats out, until body and planet find the same rhythm. Then it no longer sounds external. It becomes heartbeat. Maybe that is what the ancients wanted, to be remembered not by monument or word, but by resonance, a music that needs no performer. The music of the last horizon is not a melody at all. It is the world tuning itself back toward silence. And when at last the wind stills, when dunes level and seas dry, the stones will fall quiet again. But the vibration will continue underfoot, through the mantle, through the bones of mountains, through all the sleeping cities built on older song. You could call it echo. You could call it memory. It is both. At the very end of evening, when the stars begin to rise and the first one appears exactly above the vanished sun, the air trembles once more. The pillars breathe out a last tone, low and gentle, and then even that fades. What remains is not sound, but its outline, a calm so pure it feels like light remembering how to listen. Night folds over the old world like a careful hand, and the room grows quiet enough to hear the wick speaking in its small, steady voice. On the table, the map found near Rhodes rests unrolled, its shorelines made of ash and salt, its edges curled like a sleeping creature's spine. The candle leans, the coastlines gleam, and for a moment the parchment seems less a thing than a threshold. The traveler who once traced those vanished bays is gone now, but his notes remain, pressed between pages. Aegean strands drawn as if the sea had not yet learned to rise, inscriptions in a Greek that leans toward prayer, antediluvium faint as breath. Outside, the wind moves the olives. Inside, the room fills with the slow awareness that we are again at a gate. The traveler who found it first was a woman, Dr. Eleanor Vasilis, a Greek-British archaeologist trained at Knossos. Her journals, now kept in the British Museum's sealed archives, describe the descent as a journey into the throat of time. The chamber was lined with shelves of rock and clay, not cut but grown, stalagmites fused with purpose, bearing thousands of tablets. Some were engraved with geometric diagrams resembling constellations seen not as they are now, but as they would have appeared 12,000 years ago, before the precession of the equinoxes. Others bore hymns to the lords of the waters, written in a script still untranslatable. The oldest layers, carbon dated to around 9,200 BCE, placed the site within the era archaeologists now call the early Holocene, a time when the glaciers had begun to melt and the Black Sea was still a freshwater lake. The rain begins, soft and patient. It finds the stone passage beneath the hillside, the one the locals called the Well of Stars. Drops step down through limestone, then pause, listening, before they enter the chamber where tablets once slept. The library beneath the rain is drowned in silt now, sealed by its own caution, but the rhythm is the same as when Dr. Vasilis first brushed clay from the oldest lines. If one leans close to the floor, the ear will catch a low murmur traveling through rock. Neither language nor storm, only the instrument of both. Somewhere below, the bronze disc with 49 dots remembers the Pleiades. Somewhere deeper, a basin of bitumen and lapis remembers erasure as devotion. Words once began here and were allowed to end, not by force but by ceremony. The rain does not read them anymore. It keeps their cadence. Far away, water breathes through ruins that once knew the sun. The bells of Methone lie in their choral vestments, arranged in a harmony that the sea still touches with its slow hands. When a current passes, a note travels upward through green darkness and meets the surface as a rumor. Fishermen fall quiet for a moment and pretend they heard only wind. In a lab, years later, a bell in a vat will reproduce the same tone, and the instrument will insist on measures and names. Yet the body remembers first. The ribs hold the sound, then let it go. The missing bell, the seventh tone, remains an absence perfectly shaped, as if absence were an art left to the ocean to keep. Close to the bells or far, it does not matter, for distance changes its meaning underwater. The city that remembered the sky keeps its mirrors in blue. Santorini holds dawn inside ash. Akrotiri's pigments find their old fire in lamplight. A glass lens misfiled in a drawer returns to its work when a beam crosses it, focusing the small sun of an afternoon into the memory of morning. Sonar wanders over terraces that geometry refuses to call accident. Divers pass stairways that may be stairs, corridors that may be stone thinking of rooms. Whether the city is a name or a gesture, the sea has learned the script. On windless nights, bioluminescence copies the murals in a grammar of sparks. Spirals, lattices, a winged orb suspended as if breath could stand perfectly still. Across the plateau of Saint Lurfa, the wind that never quite sleeps threads itself again through carved holes and oval courts. The temple of breath swells and contracts in its long, slow being, the pillars tuned to a frequency older than speech. When dawn slides through the eastern corridor and touches the spiral on the standing stone, the chamber inhales once, imperceptibly, like the end of a sigh that began 12,000 years ago. Juniper and sage left their trace in the altar's pores. A whistling disc keeps its pitch even in a glass case. To breathe is to remember. The proto-sign reads, and every chest that has learned the rite of sleep knows what the stone means. The mirror waits where the Nile becomes tide. Heracleon's thresholds do not complain under silt. Al-Samt circle holds the place of a spring that still speaks fresh water into salt. Off Laconia, a street plan lies under bright shallows like a drawing laid beneath a sheet of glass. In the anoxic dark of the Black Sea, whole ships keep their ropes as if the carpenter only just stepped away. The diver lifts a bronze disc to the light and the metal accepts only a smudge, then gives it back. Some reflections prefer to be brief. Others belong to water alone. When layers meet, fresh on salt, salt on old, light trembles, folds, and becomes threshold again. A mirror can be a plate, a basin, a Heracleion, the skin between two worlds, can be the face of patience. Beyond the Cyrenaican shelf, an old field continues to do its quiet work. Furrows sleep in their mineral beds. Fossil roots hold fast to what they once knew. A ray passes over the terrace and the silt behaves like wind through grain. The garden beneath the waves exhales carbon in bubbles that lift tiny lights to the skin of the sea. At night those threads glow and wander like the least obtrusive procession. In cores, seeds of emmer and barley keep their glassy calm. They will not sprout. They do not need to. It is enough that their coats remember rain. A malachite smear on a figurine's arms still refuses the modern word pigment. Prefers leaf. On Gozo's ridge the tower cools. The stone has learned to keep daylight for hours after the sun withdraws, as if warmth were a scripture to be copied into evening. When the equinox returns, dawn will find the small circle again, thread through the aperture, and rest its weight of gold on the inner wall. A gypsum sphere will turn a little line of fire into a blade of certainty. To stand there is to be counted, shadow added to shadow until all the centuries share the same outline. Far inland and far away, in Naphtali's desert, in Newgrange's long corridor, light repeats itself like a vow. Not conquest, only return. The children of the first light go on doing what they always did. Leaving dust that gleams, arranging small stones where the heart once was, polishing quartz until it answers a cave torch with the oldest kind of choreography. In Cappadocia, alabaster held where breath used to lift. In Kafza and Sungur, red earth stayed faithful to the idea that the body is a fragment of dawn. Genetic maps route their migrations with neat arrows. The arrows are not wrong. They are also not enough. The real map runs under the skin as a quiet inclination toward radiance. To carry a shard outside at night and see whether starlight is the same as it was the first time it found an eye. Out in the deep, the statue that listens keeps listening. The trench changes its weather and the hum goes on, a tone too low for explanation to exhaust. Basalt does what basalt has time to do. It stands and takes on what life will claim of it. Anemones, films of bacteria, a lace of mineral that resembles frost made of iron. The watcher's open hands continue to gather what falls. Cable noise, whale navigation, the memory of rivers crossing shelves when shelves were meadows. Every vibration goes down into the ledger where mud turns everything into history. The ledger has no script. It is exact. The plane of silence receives the day's last light on its salt horizon and gives it back as music that travels through bone first and only then becomes something the ear can hold. Pillars angle toward wind the way reeds do toward water. Subsonic breath lifts and rests, lifts and rests. In a buried cavity, vessels of fused salt crackle like a handheld thunder that forgot how to frighten. To stand there at the moment the sun drops is to feel sound end with more authority than any word. Afterward, the quiet seems minted. It has an edge. Dr. Vasilis wrote that when she brushed the dirt from the first tablet, she felt a vibration. Faint, like the hum of low thunder. She thought at first it was the echo of her own pulse. But the rain outside had grown heavier, and the sound of drops on the cave's stone mouth blended perfectly with the resonance from below. She would later call it the rhythm of inscription. The locals refused to return after that day, saying that the place breathes with the storm. By now the candle in the room has lowered itself to a calm that resembles stone. The traveler's table carries too many places at once. Rhodes and Methone, Santorini and Heracleion, Sanliurfa and Gozo. Doggerland's drowned rivers, and the trenches unnamed on maps. The map itself has begun to curl again. Its corners lift and relax as if tasting the air. There is space enough on the parchment for one more mark. A small spiral drawn at the fold where two coastlines almost touch. Noink! Only the shadow of a fingertip smoothing the crease. The gesture is memory's grammar. Footsteps pass in the hallway and then decide against being footsteps. The rain slackens. Somewhere, only because habit asks for it, a clock attends to seconds. In the space between ticks, the library sends up a damp syllable. The bells deepen the room by one more breath. The city smiles in the way submerged walls do when a beam surprises them. The temple concentrates. The mirror refuses and reflects. The garden rises and sets itself back down. The tower keeps vigil. The children hold their shards and turn them until they learn what the night is made of. The watcher listens. The horizon chooses one last tone and then no more. If there is a gate here, it is not the carved kind with lintel and threshold. It is the place where several silences meet. The silence of ash that will not name a coast. The silence of stone that answers wind with a note and then modestly ends. The silence after bells. The silence of seeds that elect not to perform. The silence of a hand at an altar, lifting nothing, releasing nothing. Such a gate, it is enough to stand. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it only opens when the world is this still and the lamp this small. The map does not close. It settles. The wick lowers itself and steadies. The window holds the last thin reflection of a road that once led to the harbor where statues slept. A moth takes one unimportant tour of the light and withdraws. Breath slows to the pace the stones prefer. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight they do not need to be loud. They pass through the bones and into the room as something even gentler than sound. The way morning sometimes enters a house long before the sky changes. The gate does not swing or shine. It becomes indistinguishable from the dark that welcomes it. And then the chapter ends in the only way these chapters know how to end. Not with an answer, but with the soft architecture of questions arranged for sleep. If a map can dream, it does. If rain can remember, it does. If the sea can carry a song across centuries without boasting, it does. If the world before the flood left anything to us, it is this patience. To lie down as close to the old names as we can, and let the breath of the planet thread itself through ours until the horizon fails in the kindest possible way. The candle lowers to a bead. The room deepens by a shade. Somewhere, far below language, a bell finishes a note it began in another age, and the silence that follows is not empty at all. It is full of doorways. Sleep, then. The map will keep its watch. The stones will keep their breath. The water will return your reflection to itself and be grateful you ask so little. And when morning comes, it will do what mornings have always done with such ruins and such prayers. It will arrive quietly, as if the world were being written again from a blank page of light. The night does not end. It dilates. The candle is gone, yet the room still glows, not with flame, but with the quiet of things that remember light. The map lies open, the ink barely breathing, and for a moment the parchment seems to pulse like a living lung. The tablets told no clear story. They were fragments of instructions, invocations, measurements, and dreams. One spoke of a tower built upon wind, holding voices that were never written. Another of seeds carried by the flood to mountains where the gods sleep. And then, a single line repeated on multiple fragments, like a refrain. When the waters speak, listen for the dust. Outside, mist moves across the valley, the kind that carries no weight, only shape. It gathers around stones, drifts through broken gates, and slides softly through every corridor of the world that still allows it passage. The gate between dreams is not a place built of marble or guarded by thresholds. It is a turning, subtle, weightless, patient. It exists wherever memory hesitates, wherever a name nearly returns but does not. Some say it stands beneath the temple of breath, where wind learns to hum through pillars. Others say it rises on the seabed of Heracleion, between statues that no longer need eyes to see. And some insist it is not built of stone at all, but of time, the brief interval between waking and falling, when the soul begins to recall its older home. At the hour before dawn, When stars begin to fade and the horizon forgets its edge, the gate appears. Not as an arch or a door, but as a shimmer, a soft convergence of echoes from all the world's forgotten places. The bells of Methone murmur through the sand. The wind from Safa al-Samt hums its endless tone. From the deep, the watcher sends its low vibration upward, steady and unblinking. The tower at Gozo catches the first breath of light and passes it along like a message written in warmth. Each sound threads through the next until the world itself becomes an instrument. You can feel it if you are still enough, the resonance of everything that has ever listened. The library beneath the rain shifts in its sleep. The garden beneath the waves releases a sigh of bubbles that reach the surface and vanish like thoughts at the edge of speech. The gate does not ask for entry. It opens when all need to enter fades. There are travelers who claim to have crossed it. None can say how. Some describe a hall of soundless water. Others, a corridor made of air where every breath tastes of iron and rose. One spoke of standing before a mirror that reflected not a face, but the shape of a sound. A line of vibration, golden and endless. What lies beyond is never constant. To one, it is a dawn that does not end. To another, it is a library whose shelves are made of mist. To most, it is simply peace without border, the moment when every echo finds its origin and is content to rest there. Perhaps this is what the ancients meant when they built circles in the desert, towers that greeted dawn, and temples that breathed. They were not worshipping gods. They were rehearsing return. Across millennia, the builders, the dreamers, the listeners, all have been walking the same slow road toward that threshold. Every artifact, every song, every monument has been a footstep nearer. Among the artifacts was a small bronze disc no larger than a hand, etched with 7 concentric circles and a pattern of dots, 49 in total. The same pattern appears centuries later in Mesopotamia, engraved on star charts from Uruk, and in Minoan frescoes in Crete. Some scholars believe it represented the movement of the Pleiades, a cluster revered as the memory of drowned daughters of Atlas, a celestial myth born from the fear of rising seas. The disk became known as the rain calendar of Heracleion. When polished, it reflects light in soft rings, as though remembering the rain itself. And now, in the hush of this final chapter, that road has brought us here, to the brink of sleep, where the heart's rhythm matches the earth's, and silence becomes luminous. The gate between dreams waits not ahead, but within. Its doors are lungs, its hinges breath. To step through it is to exhale completely, to give the world back to itself. The wind passes once more through the temple of breath. The tower glows for a final instant. The bells cease. The sea smooths itself. The watcher listens, and in that listening, everything is forgiven. The map closes of its own accord, its last curl forming a spiral. The flame of the world lowers to a whisper, and somewhere, perhaps in you, perhaps in the ancient dust of memory, the gate opens. Not with brilliance, but with a sigh. Not with endings, but with rest. Sleep now. The flood is over. The world before it and the world after are one and the same light. As the excavation deepened, the chamber began to change. The air thickened, metallic and damp. The candles that lit the passages flickered without breeze. The archaeologists joked of ghosts, but their laughter was low and uncertain. On the 7th day, a storm gathered above the valley. Rain poured for hours, seeping into the cracks, trickling down the walls until rivulets ran between the tablets like veins of mercury. Dr. Vas Elis later wrote, "It felt as though the library had been waiting for the rain, that it needed the sound of water to remember how to speak." Under that deluge, she discovered a final alcove, a hollow space sealed by what appeared to be a deliberate wall of clay. It was soft from moisture, and when she pressed her hand against it, a portion gave way, revealing a chamber beyond. Inside lay a stone basin filled with clear water. Floating on the surface were thin flakes of gold leaf, etched with words too small to read by candlelight. When she lifted one, it dissolved instantly. Gold turned to dust, ink to shadow. Later, analysis of the basin's residue revealed traces of bitumen, mica, and pulverized lapis lazuli. materials used in Mesopotamia for sacred inscriptions that were never meant to endure. They were read once, aloud, then allowed to return to silence. The basin, it seemed, was not for storage but for forgetting, a ritual of erasure. Knowledge, in those days, was not possession, it was offering. The storm ended by dawn. When the archaeologists emerged, the valley had changed. The soil had shifted, the entrance half collapsed. Dr. Vasilis returned weeks later, but the rains had flooded the lower tunnels. The tablets were gone. Only the bronze disc remained, found near the surface, faintly warm to the touch. In her last recorded note, she wrote, "Perhaps the library was never meant to be excavated. Perhaps it rains to remind the earth of what it once knew. Today, that part of the coast is closed to excavation, a protected site under Turkish law, listed as unstable terrain. But those who live nearby still speak of the sound that rises from the ground during heavy storms. It begins as a low hum and grows into a rhythm that seems to carry syllables. They call it the language of the drowned. Some believe it is the echo of the tablets still below, speaking through water. Others say it is the memory of the storm that once ended the world. If one stands in that valley at dusk, when the air is thick with rain and the olive trees shiver in the wind, the sound truly does resemble breath. Slow, patient, and impossibly old. It moves through the soil like a forgotten song. The puddles mirror the fading sky, and for a moment, it is hard to tell whether the rain is falling or rising. Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. The idea of a library beneath the rain feels impossible. Yet libraries, in their oldest form, were always acts of resistance against oblivion. The clay tablets of Nineveh, the papyrus rolls of Alexandria, the scrolls sealed within the caves of Qumran, all were attempts to hold what the world continually erases. The rain, however, belongs to another kind of memory. Fluid, cyclical, unwilling to be catalogued. The ancients must have known that even when words dissolve, their rhythm lingers. The library beneath the rain was never built to last. It was built to listen. Some archaeologists speculate that the chamber's structure mirrors an acoustic design, a resonance chamber carved to amplify the sound of water. When rain strikes the limestone above, it creates standing waves that travel through the hollow spaces, producing frequencies close to the human heartbeat. The ancients may have stood within those chambers not to read, but to feel the words they carved, to let vibration become comprehension. When modern explorers return, they find nothing but stone, moss, and dripping silence. Yet, in that silence, a rhythm persists. It moves gently, like breath against a sleeping world. One could almost believe the tablets are still there, resting beneath centuries of silt, repeating their hymn to the flood. If you listen long enough, you might hear it, the sound of rain becoming language, the steady pulse of memory turning into mist. Perhaps the library was never meant to be found. Perhaps it only appears when the rain begins to fall, when the world is quiet enough to remember. And when it does not reveal its knowledge, but its longing, the ancient truth that nothing written is ever truly gone, only waiting for water to read it once more. Deep below the Aegean, where the light fades into green silence, Diverse once glimpsed the edge of a roofline half buried in sand. Columns leaned like weary monks, their capitals crusted with coral. A bronze bell, tilted on its side, rested in the silt. When the current touched its rim, it trembled, and the sound, though faint, was unmistakable. A tone too pure to be accident, resonating through the water like a memory refusing to sleep. The discovery came in 1958, off the coast of Methone in southern Greece. Local fishermen had long spoken of bells heard at night beneath their boats, soft chimes that rose through the water during storms. They said it was the sea praying. But when a diving expedition from the University of Athens descended to chart the seabed, they found what appeared to be the remains of a monastery, its cloisters extending along a ridge that now lies 30 meters below the surface. Limestone arches, mosaic fragments, and a series of bronze bells fused with coral, evidence of devotion swallowed by time. The architecture resembled early Byzantine work, 6th or 7th century, yet deeper layers beneath it revealed something far older. Cut stone foundations of an earlier temple, carbon dated to roughly 3,200 BCE. The two structures, it seemed, shared the same ground, as if one faith had simply inherited the silence of another. The older blocks bore inscriptions too eroded to read, except for one. A carved line in archaic Greek. To those who guard the waters. When the divers first entered the cloister, their lamps caught the faint shimmer of mosaics still clinging to the walls. Tiny tesserae of lapis, gold, and mother-of-pearl formed images that the sea had blurred but not erased. A robed figure holding a lantern, a spiral of fish swimming around an open book, and, most hauntingly, a bell suspended over a wave. Even submerged, the gold still glowed as if lit from within. The monks who built it must have known that light behaves differently in water. Slower, softer, as though humbled. Later studies linked the monastery to the Order of St. Phocas, a coastal brotherhood known for tending to sailors and recording maritime weather patterns along the Aegean routes. Their chronicles mention a sanctuary built at the edge of the world, where the sea breathes through stone. The order vanished sometime after the earthquake of 365 CE, when much of the Mediterranean coastline was reshaped by tsunamis. Entire towns sank overnight. It is believed that the monks, refusing to abandon their vows, remained as the waters rose, ringing their bells until sound itself dissolved. In the archives of Constantinople, a single parchment survives. Codex Hydronomicon, a water-stained manuscript copied by a scribe named Stephanos the Quiet. It speaks of a great trembling of the deep and brothers who wrote their psalms on the tide. The text ends abruptly, as though interrupted mid-sentence. Historians once dismissed it as poetic allegory. After the Methone discovery, it began to read like memory. When sonar imaging mapped the full site in the 1990s, researchers found that the bells, 7 in total, were arranged in a circle, suspended by bronze frames now collapsed upon themselves. Each was cast in a different alloy, producing unique tones. When computer simulations reconstructed their pitch, the pattern corresponded to the harmonic intervals of Gregorian chant, a scale not formalized until a millennium later. Some acousticians believe it was intentional. The sea itself, passing through the bells, would have created an endless hymn. Sound as prayer, water as choir. There is a quiet kind of divinity in imagining that a monastery designed to sing forever beneath the waves. The lead diver, Nikos Kaliades, wrote in his logbook that during one descent, he felt a vibration travel through the water before he saw anything. He compared it to a cathedral breathing. When he reached the cloister, his gauge needle quivered though the water was still. Later, when the footage was reviewed, a faint resonance could be heard on the audio track. Not mechanical, not random. 5 notes, evenly spaced. The same tone produced when the team later struck one of the recovered bells in a laboratory tank. The sea, it seemed, had been ringing them still. Artifacts raised from the site were encrusted with coral and calcite, but one item stood apart. A small wooden icon sealed inside a copper box. The image was barely visible, a haloed figure holding an astrolabe. Analysis dated the wood to the 2nd century BCE, long before Christian imagery existed. Beneath the paint, X-ray scans revealed an older engraving, a stylized wave and a spiral sun. Perhaps the monks reused the wood from a pre-Christian shrine. Perhaps they simply understood that sanctity outlasts doctrine. The sea, impartial and eternal, accepts all prayers. Further investigation revealed tunnels leading outward from the main cloister, each narrowing into darkness. Oceanographers traced them to vents where freshwater still seeps from underground springs. Evidence that the site once stood near a coastal well, later swallowed as sea levels rose after the last glacial period. It fits the pattern seen elsewhere. Pavlopetri in Laconia, at Lityam off Haifa, the Neolithic village beneath Lake Van. Each was erased by water, yet perfectly preserved by it, as though time decided to whisper rather than destroy. Standing on the modern shore above Methone, one can sometimes see faint shadows below the waves, geometric outlines in the turquoise. At sunset, when the sea turns to gold, the illusion deepens. Fishermen pause their nets, waiting for the hour when the light strikes the water just right. Some swear they hear bells again, distant but clear, ringing not from below but within the mind. where sound and memory intertwine. It lasts only a few seconds. Then the world falls silent, as if listening back. There is a fragment of legend that persists among the coastal villagers, that on the night of the Great Flood, the abbot of the monastery ordered the bells to be rung continuously, not as warning, but as farewell. The sea, moved by their devotion, agreed to keep the music alive. To this day, when the tide shifts under certain winds, the water hums along the old harmonic line. A hymn without language, pure and weightless. Some divers call it the seventh tone. They say it comes from the bell that was never found. The missing bell became a myth of its own. Some claim it lies deeper still, in a trench where sonar loses meaning. Others believe it was raised long ago and now hangs somewhere in secret, perhaps in a monastery high in the Meteora cliffs, still ringing on storm nights in sympathy with its brothers below. The truth, as always, drifts between. When you think of the drowned monastery, picture not ruins but persistence. Candle smoke spiraling through green water, mosaic saints gazing upward through silt, hands still folded in prayer though no lungs remain to breathe. The bells, wrapped in coral, shimmer faintly in the gloom. Crabs move through the arches like acolytes on silent duty. Light filters down in columns, gold dissolving into blue. Each glimmer touches bronze, and the sea answers with a tone so low it could be mistaken for heartbeat. In the end, perhaps that is what the monks intended, a merging of life and silence, faith and flood. A sanctuary where sound never ceases, even when the world above forgets. Their bells are the ocean's pulse now, tolling for neither death nor time, but for remembrance. If you listen closely on quiet nights, when rain falls on calm water, the rhythm begins again. A pattern of 7 notes, each fading into the next, until you can no longer tell where one ends and the other begins. It is not loud. It does not seek your attention. It waits for stillness. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Somewhere beneath the layered dust of Crete, between the ruins of Knossos and the whispering olive fields of Phaistos, archaeologists uncovered a single wall that did not belong. It was smoother, colder to the touch, and carried pigments unlike any in known Minoan frescoes. Blues that glowed faintly under shadow, and fragments of gold leaf arranged in what appeared to be constellations. Beneath that wall, buried in silt hardened by centuries of rain, they found the corner of a tablet engraved with words from an unrecognized tongue. It spoke, in fractured syllables, of a city that remembered the sky even after the sea had taken it. The inscription was first catalogued in 1976, then forgotten in museum storage until an astronomer named Callista Anagnou requested to re-examine it decades later. Under magnification, she noticed something strange. The layout of its symbols mirrored the pattern of stars above Crete around 10,500 BCE, the dawn of what myth calls the age before the flood. The tablet became known among researchers as Fragment Theta, and from that fragment, a story began to uncoil. Not of a lost city waiting to be found, but of one that might have never truly disappeared. Imagine the air above the Aegean 10,000 years ago, warm currents sweeping across an island larger than any we know now, temples standing on high cliffs, their walls aligned to the solstices. Each morning the citizens would gather in open courtyards where polished limestone caught the sunrise and scattered it like water. They believed light itself was divine, a living messenger between the heavens and the earth. The city was built not to conquer the sea, but to mirror the sky. Archaeological traces whisper of such a civilization, not Atlantis as later legend would name it, but the Dharan culture, precursors to the Minoans who flourished before the volcanic catastrophe of Santorini around 1600 BCE. Beneath the ash layers at Akrotiri, frescoes depict skies filled with red spirals, floating orbs, and winged suns. Scholars call them symbolic. Yet the pigments, made from crushed hematite and azurite, glow faintly under low light, as though responding to wavelengths invisible to the naked eye. Even in ruin, the walls shimmer like dawn trapped in stone. When Callista Anagnou examined Fragment Theta, she saw in it echoes of those same frescoes. The phrase, "the city that remembered the sky," might have been a name, not a metaphor. Some believe it referred to an actual site, one now beneath the sea near the Cycladic shelf. Sonar surveys there have revealed geometric anomalies, rectangular outlines beneath 40 meters of sediment, too regular for chance. The oceanographers who studied them described long corridors, open plazas, even staircases carved from bedrock. The sediment contained traces of obsidian and ochre, materials used in Bronze Age construction. But deeper still, beyond the dating range of conventional archaeology, lay tools of a different order. Basalt chisels, polished spheres of quartz, and fragments of carved limestone aligned along magnetic lines of the seabed, as if the city had been built to converse with the earth itself. Legends from the Aegean Islands speak of a place called Eleuthera, where people wove sunlight into their walls. When the flood came, they said, the city did not drown but rose into reflection, existing half in water, half in memory. Fishermen still tell of lights seen beneath calm seas at night, moving like stars beneath glass. Marine biologists attribute the phenomenon to bioluminescent plankton caught in currents near volcanic vents. Yet the patterns those lights form, spirals, lattices, constellations, mirror precisely the murals found in Minoan sanctuaries. It is as though the sea still remembers the geometry of the city it took. In one of the deeper excavation sites near Santorini, a group of archaeologists found a narrow chamber sealed behind a wall of volcanic tuff. Inside lay a series of clay tablets preserved by ash. On them, engraved in linear script, were hymns addressed to the Watchers of the Wind. The translation remains partial, but one line stands clear. They built with mirrors, not stones. To build with mirrors, perhaps not literally, but in the sense of imitation. To make architecture that reflects heaven rather than resists earth. The people of Eleuthera, if it existed, might have seen their buildings as instruments of alignment, a city tuned to the frequency of stars. When Dr. Anagnou presented her findings at a quiet conference in Athens, she concluded her talk with a curious phrase: if they remembered the sky, it is because they knew it would be lost. Those who attended described her voice as trembling, not with fear but with reverence. The fragments she displayed, stone, pigment, and dust, seemed less like ruins and more like messages sent forward through water. Under satellite imaging, the region around Santorini reveals faint, concentric ridges beneath the seafloor, the outline of a metropolis, or perhaps a pattern shaped by volcanic eruption. To science, it remains uncertain, but to the imagination, it feels deliberate, as though the city itself had sunk in a perfect spiral, descending like a celestial map into the sea. If you were to dive there now, the water would close over you like a cathedral's dome. Shafts of sunlight would fall through shifting blue, and between them you might glimpse the edge of a pillar or the curve of a stair. The seabed breathes with silt and light, the ruins half-formed and half-erased. Sometimes the currents sound like voices, syllables carried by the slow movement of sand. Archaeologists call it coincidence, but those who have descended more than once speak of hearing music. Low, resonant tones echoing through the water, not mechanical, not random, as though the wind itself, trapped in stone corridors, had learned to hum. Among the recovered objects from the region is a single glass lens, perfectly spherical, found near a collapsed wall. It predates known Greek glassmaking by thousands of years. When light passes through it underwater, it focuses into a beam, a small, unwavering sun that burns softly against the darkness. No one can explain how it was made. It rests now in a museum drawer, its tag faded, its label misfiled among Roman fragments. But sometimes, when handled under lamplight, it still flares faintly, as though remembering a brightness greater than this age allows. In the myths of Hesiod and later Orphic hymns, there are references to a time when the sky fell into the sea. Scholars interpret it as metaphor, a poetic account of the stars reflected on the water. Yet across cultures, in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley, the same idea recurs, that an age ended when heaven and ocean exchanged places. The city that remembered the sky, then, may not be a ruin at all, but a warning, a record of what happens when reflection replaces remembrance, when light becomes too heavy to hold. Callista Anagnou died in 2012, her final paper unfinished. Her notes, found on her desk, contained a single sentence in Greek. They built their city so the stars could rest. Some believe she meant that literally, that the alignment of Elethra's temples was meant to anchor celestial memory, preventing the heavens from forgetting their path. The sea is not cruel. It is a patient archivist. It keeps what the wind discards and returns it in fragments. Shells, stone, whispers. Somewhere below Santorini's caldera, amid volcanic glass and coral, lie the bones of a city that once glowed with dawn. The currents move gently through its corridors, carrying sediment like drifting prayer dust. Occasionally, a shaft of sunlight pierces deep enough to touch a fresco. Blue upon gold, a burst of color like a held breath. For a moment, the city awakens, remembering. Then the light fades and it dreams again. If you stand on the cliffs at Akrotiri at dusk, you can feel it. The wind smells faintly of copper and ash. The sea stretches in perfect stillness, its surface mirroring the sky. For an instant, they are one, heaven reflected in water, time folding into its own image. And if the air is still enough, you might hear it. The faint echo of waves colliding with stone, rhythmic as breathing, ancient as prayer. Perhaps that is all remembrance truly is, the echo of the sky within the sea. A light once held, now drifting through water. A city not lost, but dreaming of sunrise. Some say the flood erased it. Others believe it still stands, waiting in the depths for a day when the stars will look down and recognize their reflection again. In the southern desert of Turkey, between Harran and the limestone hills of Sanliurfa, there lies a stretch of land where the wind never truly stops. The Bedouin call it Al-Nafez, the place that breathes. Archaeologists know it as part of the Harran Basin, home to the world's earliest sanctuaries, Göbekli Tepe, Navali Kori, Karahan Tepe, temples raised before writing, before the plow, before the idea of walls. Here, beneath the endless hum of wind, they uncovered a structure unlike the others. An oval of stone pillars carved not with animals or suns, but with lungs, clouds, and spirals of air. When the first excavation team brushed sand from its floor, they felt heat rise from the limestone. Faint but unmistakable, like the exhalation of something sleeping. The chamber was small, 12 meters across, yet every surface seemed alive with carving. Winged figures bent in prayer beside swirling lines that resembled currents of air. Between them were countless small holes bored through the rock, running into the earth like flutes. When wind crossed the site, a tone emerged, low, hollow, vibrating through the chest rather than the ear. The desert, it seemed, was singing. Carbon dating placed the site around 9,500 BCE, centuries before the great flood layers at Mesopotamia or the rise of Jericho. Its builders were hunter-gatherers who had not yet invented pottery, yet they carved stone with precision that defies explanation. Each pillar bore a faint groove spiraling from base to top, the same pattern later seen in Egyptian hieroglyphs for breath and spirit, the Ka. Long before Egypt, long before Sumer, here was a people shaping air into sanctity. The local villagers call it Nefs Mabedi, the temple of breath. They say the wind that moves through it carries voices from the time before language, and that if one listens closely, the stones will whisper their first word. During the excavation of 1998, a German archaeologist, Dr. Kurt Rodeman, recorded an event that he could not explain. At dusk, as the temperature dropped and the desert cooled, the air within the temple began to tremble. Dust lifted in slow spirals. His team's instruments registered no quake, no storm. Yet the sound, a long, hollow hum, persisted for nearly a minute. Later analysis showed that the openings in the pillars formed an exact harmonic sequence, a natural resonator tuned to the frequency of human breath. The temple, it seemed, had been designed not to contain people, but to contain sound itself. In ancient Near Eastern myth, creation begins not with light but with air. The Sumerians spoke of Enlil, the Lord of Breath, who separated earth from sky by exhaling. Egyptian priests spoke of the god Shu, who held heaven aloft on his breath. Even Genesis begins with wind moving over water, the Ruach Elohim, divine air before words. The temple of breath stood at the intersection of these myths, as if its stones had heard them before they were spoken. When Dr. Rodeman traced the temple's layout, he found it mirrored the shape of human lungs, twin semicircles joined by a narrow corridor that led eastward, directly toward the horizon where the sun rose at equinox. At dawn, the first beam of light entered that passage and struck a single standing stone carved with a spiral. The spiral, when seen from above, resembles the curve of wind in motion. Ancient engineers would later call such designs Venturi chambers, structures that accelerate air through narrowing paths. But here, 12 millennia ago, it had a different purpose: to give the wind a voice. Inside the central chamber, the air was still enough to hear the faint hiss of sand shifting outside. Yet every footstep set the walls humming, as though the limestone were thin as drum skin. The ancients who built it must have known the desert's language, how sound travels differently through heat, how silence becomes a material you can shape. They built not a temple for gods, but a conduit between breathing earth and breathing flesh. In 2003, a fragment of carved limestone was found near the temple's entrance, showing a human figure kneeling before a spiral cloud. The figure's mouth is open, the lips parted as if exhaling. Beneath it, in proto-cuneiform symbols later found on Sumerian tablets, the words read, "To breathe is to remember." That phrase appears again thousands of years later in Egyptian mortuary texts. The breath of life returns to the nostrils of the just. It may have originated here, carried along migrations of early priests who remembered the temple's sound. Breath as memory, wind as witness. Archaeologists studying microscopic residue on the altar stones found traces of burnt herbs, juniper, myrrh, and wild sage, plants still used in cleansing rituals today. When burned, they release compounds that expand the lungs, altering heart rhythm. The ancients may have inhaled them as part of ceremony, synchronizing breath with wind, heartbeat with echo. In this way, worship became respiration. The temple itself an enormous lung breathing through stone and sand. No bones were ever found, no tools left behind, only smooth floors polished by centuries of feet. It was not a place of burial or sacrifice. It was a place of listening, perhaps of alignment. When night falls there now, wind still threads through the openings, and the sound resembles the rise and fall of distant chanting. The Bedouin guides say it is the desert praying to itself. Scientists later discovered that the site rests directly above an underground cavern system, extending several kilometers toward Karahan Tepe. Some passages carry airflows that reverse direction with the seasons, a natural breathing motion. It explains the constant movement of wind that gave the place its name. Yet the deeper one descends, the more the air feels charged, heavy with minerals and silence. Instruments register magnetic anomalies, as if the Earth's pulse slows in that chamber. One researcher described it as standing inside the lungs of the planet. Among the most enigmatic finds was a circular stone disc, carved thin as a plate, with a hole at its center. When spun on its axis, it emits a low whistle, a tone identical to the frequency produced when air passes through the temple's pillars. Such whistling discs have been found at other Neolithic sites, in Malta's hypogeum, in the caves of Ain Ghazal, even in early Andean shrines thousands of miles away. Separated by oceans, yet united by sound. Civilizations who never met built the same breath into stone. Standing at the site today, archaeologists note how the desert itself seems to hold its inhalation at dusk. The sun drops behind the hills, the heat thins, and the wind begins to move again, threading through the openings with perfect rhythm. For a moment, the entire valley becomes a single instrument, low, steady, alive. And in that vibration there is a feeling older than belief, the awareness that existence itself depends on alternating silence and air. Some myths say the first humans were sculpted from clay, and the gods breathed life into them. Perhaps those who built the Temple of Breath were imitating that act, shaping clay into form, waiting for the wind to pass through, to animate the stillness. The line between worship and creation was thin as sand. In the nearby museum at Saint-Lurfa, the recovered pillars stand in glass cases. Visitors approach them quietly, unsure why they whisper. The holes drilled into their sides still carry resonance. If one leans close and exhales gently, the stone hums back, as if recognizing the rhythm. Guards discourage it, yet people do it anyway, a reflex older than religion. Breath seeking breath. The site remains partly unexcavated, preserved under protective cover. During fieldwork seasons, when storms sweep across the plateau, the wind pours through those same passages, producing tones that drift for miles. At night, herders say the hills sound like flutes. Some even claim the wind pauses after each burst, as if waiting for a reply. What were they asking, those builders of stone lungs? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps they understood that prayer does not always require words. Only rhythm, the slow exchange between silence and sound. The same rhythm every sleeper carries in the chest. If you were to stand there now, in the cool of early morning, the stones would shimmer with dew, and the first light would thread through the eastern corridor. The air would move softly through the carved holes, and the temple would breathe again. It would not roar or chant. It would exhale, a sound like dust stirring on an old page. You might close your eyes and imagine that the entire desert is sighing with you. Perhaps that was always its purpose, to remind the earth how to breathe after the flood, after silence, after memory. A temple not of stone or sky, but of wind, a bridge between what speaks and what listens. And when the last gust fades, and the sand settles once more into its ancient rhythm, all that remains is stillness, vast, invisible, eternal. The breath returns to the world, and the world briefly remembers itself. Far from shore, where the sea forgets its color and light loosens into green dusk, a diver descends along a line that hums softly against her glove. The water cools by degrees, each meter a quieter century. Particles drift like dust in a long-closed room. When her lamp tilts, the beam folds upon itself, a wavering veil where two bodies of water meet. Chemists call it a Heracleion, a boundary between layers. She calls it a mirror. The surface quivers but does not break. When she passes through, sound changes, heartbeat muffled, bubbles turning silver and slow. On the slate at her wrist, a name. Heracleion, the ancient Thonis, once Egypt's gate to the Mediterranean, a harbor city that greeted Greek ships and offered them to the Nile. Archaeologists mapped it in the early 2000s, lifting statues of kings and queens, temple stelae, gold weights, ritual vessels, the river's memory returning in the hands of divers. Somewhere among its fallen colonnades, she has been told, lies a disk of bronze polished flat on one face, a mirror if mirrors are allowed to sleep. The ground rises out of darkness, not as ruin at first, but as texture. Sand ridges, snail trails, the faint grit of brick where walls forgot themselves. Her beam clears a cloud of silt and finds a column head nested in eelgrass. Beside it, the corner of a threshold, granite still sharp where centuries of river silt shielded it. In the drift, a cluster of amphorae leans like a broken choir. The current is gentle, the kind that carries silt like incense. She moves slowly, fins barely breathing, until the light touches something round. Not shell, not stone. A circle of greened metal half buried, no handle left. When she brushes it with a gloved thumb, it gleams under the crust. A single eyelash of brightness. She does not lift it. The river has a right to its reflection. Later, in the barge where finds are recorded with careful hands, a conservator will mention that Egyptian and Greek mirrors were often bronze, cast and polished until they carried faces like water carries sky. Many went to tombs. Some traveled by ship. A few slept in silt where priests once purified themselves before entering a sanctuary. At Heracleion, an inscription to Ammonius still remembers sunlight. The mirror would not be out of place.